All right. We might not be live streaming, but we are recording, so we can always post it up later.
Okay.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you very much, Jenny. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our meeting this evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order with my apologies, starting a little bit late, 7:14 p.m., and to recognize that it's my privilege and honor to be chairing this meeting on the traditional lands of the Hawaiian Nation, and we're blessed and honored to be able to share those lands. So the first item before we get into the agenda is a quick round of introduction, and I'll start with myself. I'm Bob Beckett. I'm the chair for this evening's meeting, and I'm the area director representing this beautiful community of Bamfield. And Jenny, over to you, perhaps.
Thanks, Bob. I think most of you guys, Jenny Brunn recently moved into the position of General Manager of Community Services, previously Manager of Operations, and it's great to see you guys. It's been a little while.
And go ahead, anybody step up, please.
Hey guys, I'm Eddie Kunderman, Operations Manager for the ACRD. I started March 29th, so I'm still kind of getting my feet wet here, so to speak. It's a pleasure to be here, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Eddie, and welcome. Go ahead, John.
John Mastia, I'm here by way of the APC.
Thanks, John. And Les.
Barry Otterson, resident of Bamfield, member of the Water Board.
Thank you very much, Barry.
I've heard.
Go ahead, Phil.
All right, Phil Lavoie, Fire Chief for the Bamfield Volunteer Fire Department, and also local taxpayer.
Good thing to note, especially with tonight's agenda.
Yes,
over to you, JP.
Yes.
JP Hasty, Bamfield community member.
Thanks, JP. Now, I don't have everyone up on the screen, so I'm having trouble seeing everybody. Who else has not introduced themselves yet tonight?
Hi, everybody. Les Butler here, Bamfield Water Operator.
Thanks, Les, for all your good work.
My name's Chris Holmes. I'm with the Coors Associates Engineering Limited. I'm one of the project engineers, and I worked on the study that's being presented tonight.
Thanks, Chris. Very, very, very thorough report. Is there anyone else, Jenny?
No, I think we've got everyone now. And I don't know if Lisa's going to make it. I'm just kind of emailing back and forth with her to try and see if we can get her online or not.
You betcha. Thank you. Thank you for that. So
is my audio coming through on this end?
Sorry, what was that?
Is my audio coming through?
Yes, it is. It's
okay,
fine,
good.
Good. Thank you. So item number 2
great,
is approval
thanks.
of the agenda. If there's no other additions or changes to the agenda, could we get a motion to approve, please? John is making that motion, seconded by
JP, I'll second that.
JP. Thank you very much. And again, I'm having struggles. Is there anyone opposed to that motion? Hearing none, then motion approved. Item number 3, Bamfield Water Committee meetings held April 27th, 2020. Those minutes were attached that Jenny sent out. Could I have a motion that they be received, please? Again, John makes that motion, seconded by
JP, I'll second that motion.
thank you. Any comments? Hearing none, is there anyone opposed to the adoption of the minutes? Hearing none, motion approved. Thank you very much. Item number 4, request for decision. Number 4A, Bamfield Water Committee Terms of Reference and Bylaw Update 2021. Jenny, I assume that you're going to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So every year, the terms of references for committees is brought to the committee for review to see if any changes are wanted and to make sure everything's in good shape. This year, we've actually amended all of the terms of references for all of the committees in the regional district to add in the strategic plan. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that the committees are reviewing that and working in alignment with what the overall larger strategic plan is for the board. I think there's a reference in there, and if you would like more information, I'd be happy to share that if you haven't seen it already. That's the only change that we've added in there. But when we change the terms of reference, we have to amend the bylaw because we have committees established by bylaw. So the recommendation is to basically send to the board to adopt the bylaw for this. And unless there's any other changes, which we could review and add in now as well, if the committee wanted to see changes.
Sure. And just before we open it up for questions, I would add that I had the pleasure of working with the board to create the first strategic plan that was formally adopted by the board and the ACRD. And it's really important for a board to have these guiding principles to use as a litmus test with respect to all activities and all undertakings. So again, as Jenny said, if you want more information on the strategic plan, by all means, reach out to me or Jenny for additional information. But getting back to the question at hand, are there any comments, any questions about this motion and or the bylaws?
I have a
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I have a question regarding some of the numbers. So this is the right time to speak to that. I can wait or speak to that now.
Are you referring, Barry, to the numbers in the bylaw, the bylaw itself, or with respect to item number B, the draft infrastructure renewal?
I guess it's a draft infrastructure renewal. So
Yeah, so
I'm not sure. I'm just reading the notes that I got from Jenny here on that.
okay. Can you give us an example just so that we can make sure that we're dealing with either 4A or 4B? I want to make sure we're sticking with 4A, but go ahead. So what?
Okay, well, I'm speaking specifically to the connection fees and how they were arrived at. So I don't know if I don't have the agenda. I'm looking at what I've got from Jenny, but I don't see the agenda.
Oh, okay. So I think Jenny, Barry's referring to item 4B, and we're not discussing that right now. We're just dealing with the terms of reference.
Fair enough. Yep. Okay.
Okay. So, and we'll have plenty of time, Barry, once we get into 4B to flush that out. No pun intended. Are there any comments, questions, concerns about the terms of reference? If that's the case, then could I have someone make that motion that the Bamfield Water Committee recommend that the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors gives 3 readings and adoption to bylaw A1070-2 Bamfield Water Committee Amendment 2021 and approve the revised committee terms of reference?
I'll make that motion, JP.
Moved by JP, seconded by John Mass. Any questions, comments? Any objections? Hearing none. Motion approved. Thank you very much. Now, moving on to item 4B, Bamfield Water System Draft Infrastructure Renewal and Long Range Plan. And again, I assume, Jenny, that you'll introduce this for us.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've actually asked Chris Holmes to come to be here because this is a fairly technical document and it's very comprehensive. And so Chris is going to do a short overview of the report. I assume actually you guys have all read it since I know your personality types and you guys are heavy readers. So, but he's still going to give just a brief overview and then be available to answer questions. Now we do have the covering staff report, and once Chris is done, I think he'll pass it back to me and we can talk about taking that information and the recommendations that we've sort of laid out as a result of the report. And then maybe we'll accept questions after Chris has spoken and then I've spoken, and then we'll open it up for questions. And I think there probably will be quite a few. So if it's okay, I'll hand it over to Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jenny. And thank you, members, for allowing us to speak to you about your water system. And Coors was tasked with the responsibility of developing an infrastructure renewal plan for the Bamfield water system. And along with that, we were asked to look at what upgrades or what was the capacity of the system to fight fires, and what upgrades might be needed to bring the system up to fight fires to a minimum standard. And so the report is written around those two sort of objectives, looking at this water system's ability to fight fires and to meet the demands of the residents day in and day out. And then to look at, well, what's the cost to maintain the infrastructure that you currently have in place, and how much money should you be accruing each year in order to maintain the system's viability and being able to be proactive and not just reactive to situations as they arise. No different than maintaining a vehicle, changing your oil, changing your tires, changing your spark plugs, things like that, that if you don't do on a regular basis, they lead to larger bills. But if you do on a regular basis, then the life of the infrastructure is extended. Like any man-made infrastructure, as you're aware, it wears out over time. I don't know how much detail to go in specifically in the report because there is a lot of information there. You're aware of your system. You have just over 3 kilometers of water supply main to get raw water to your water treatment plant. Your water treatment plant was put online last year, and it produces water that's then pumped into the distribution to your 2 reservoirs, and from your reservoirs again goes out into the distribution system, and you have about 13 kilometers of water main to service your 207 customers. And so you've got a significant amount of infrastructure in place to serve relatively small number of connections. And I was just doing some quick calculations before the meeting began. And for your 13 kilometers of water main that you have for distribution, that works out to roughly about 64 meters of lineal pipe per connection. Now, if you were in a municipality where I am, like the town of Comox, you would generally have roughly 10 meters of pipe per connection. So you're 6 times longer, and that's just the nature of where the population is and having to serve it through 2 submarine pipelines. And as a result of having that extensive amount of infrastructure, even though some of the mains are quite small, you still have to maintain those. And as a result of that infrastructure, the cost to maintain it per connection seems relatively high compared to other areas that are of a denser community. But that's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. And the infrastructure is aging, it's getting older, and some of it is at or near the end of its classified useful life cycle. Some of it still has a ways to go, and some of it is maybe failing prematurely, such as your submarine pipeline between East and West Bamfield, and that's a number of reasons for why that could be happening. It could be because of external forces, because of being struck by boat anchors being dragged across, or it could be other items as well, but that's the one that we've sort of been most aware of. And there was 5 breaks that have been repaired on it. I think there's been a few more since that time when we produced that report. And then also your raw water main that comes from Sagsaw Lake also has a number of repairs on it as well, which isn't unusual, but the more repairs there are, it sort of indicates that the infrastructure's getting nearer its end of life, and you should be planning on replacing it. And submarine pipelines are more apt for having issues than mains that are buried in the ground, just because of the nature of them being exposed when they're on the bottom of the seafloor versus buried underground. So we did an analysis looking at your infrastructure. We estimate its present value to be around about $10.6 million. If it was to be built in its entirety today, roughly speaking. We then looked at sort of 2 ranges for replacement based on useful life. We looked at a short lifespan versus a long lifespan. And when we looked at those, it seemed to indicate that your system on a short-term lifespan had about 16 years remaining. Now, bear in mind, that's an average of all the components. Some components are only 5 years lifespan, others are 80 years, like your water mains. And so when we look at a shorter lifespan of only 16 years remaining, it says in 16 years time, the cost of that infrastructure to replace it would be $16.4 million. We went to a longer lifespan. It says it would last for about another 44 years, but at that time you'd need $33 million to replace it. And then when you take those and you divide it by your number of connections, and you allow in for, if you're collecting those funds once a year, and allowing for inflation plus interest that you will incur on the money as it's in a bank account accruing interest, how much do you need to put away each year in order to be able to maintain the infrastructure? And the analysis says it's somewhere between $2,900 to $6,200 per year per connection in order to keep your infrastructure renewed and operating. And of course, that's based on 207 connections. If you have more connections, then that cost per connection could go down. And as you actually replace infrastructure and the costs come in for what it actually costs, you can then look at, well, if we had budgeted $500,000 for this project, but it actually costs us $600,000, then you'd want to look and see maybe there's other projects that have been estimated costs need to go up and increased. And the opposite would be true as well. If we had said the cost was going to be $500,000, but it actually came in at $400,000, then you can again look at it. So these are guides for you. And so that covers the infrastructure new rule. I'll just quickly touch on sort of the long range plan and the sort of improving the water system for fighting fires. And again, because many of your pipes are small diameters, 4 inches or less than a number of 3 and 2 inch water supply mains, which are fine for just meeting the domestic demands of a single homeowner. But if you're to fight a fire, it becomes a significant challenge because you just can't get the water through the main to fight the fire. And so significant upgrades are needed to your system. Generally speaking, a water main needs to be at least 6 inches to fight a fire. And because your system is spread out, some of those mains actually have to be larger. Like the one across the inlet from east to west Bamfield, that would be the main supply line for bringing fire flows over to west Bamfield from east. That would be upsized from its current 6 inch to at least a 12 inch, 300 millimeter diameter. But in order to get it over from east to west Bamfield, you need to increase the size of the main from the reservoir to west Bamfield as well. And so there's upgrades required in through there as well. And wherever possible, you want to loop dead-ended mains because that helps improve fire flow and the water quality as well. And then, of course, your reservoirs, you currently have, I think, just under 500 cubic meters of storage. You would need significantly more to fight a commercial property fire. And we estimate your total storage volume would need to be around 1,500 cubic meters, so almost 3 times what you presently have in place. And when you add up all that infrastructure upgrades, we estimate that the cost is going to be somewhere in between $15 to $18 million. And one of the issues that comes to bear is if you did have a major fire and you drained your reservoir to about half its capacity, because half of the storage would be just for fighting fires for a large commercial property fire, your water treatment plant wouldn't be able to fill it back up within the 24 hours. And that's kind of the general guideline, that you always want to have the reservoir full within a 24-hour period, because if another need arises, you can then utilize that water. But the capacity of your water treatment plant, which is fine right now, is 628 cubic meters a day. But if you were to fight a major fire and you needed to refill that reservoir, you would have to increase the capacity of your water treatment plant, but then you would also have to increase the supply line from Sagsaw Lake to your water treatment plant, because though your water treatment plant capacity would increase, you wouldn't be able to get the water from the lake to the water treatment plant. So there's a whole cascading effect that goes through the system, and you never sorry, I should back up. Not that you never, but you then have to decide what's the priority and which do you tackle first, and sort of work your way from there to your ultimate goal of what is it that you need the system to do, and what's the amount of risk that both the ACRD and the Water Committee and the public are able to accept, because there's always trade-offs, cost versus benefit. And that's kind of a brief nutshell. I didn't want to get into too much detail, but that's the brief overview of our report, and I'll turn it back over to Jenny and the chair.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Chris.
very much, Chris. Go ahead, Jenny. I was just thanking Chris.
Thanks, Bob. Yes, so we appreciate Coors' report, and as Chris had said, we're looking at a very large cost estimate for doing some renewal and replacement, and those are large $1 million price tags. But when we look at sort of breaking it down year by year, what we need to be collecting and putting away in for replacement, essentially, which is always what we're looking at, is our capital contribution. And so Chris had mentioned a range, and we've since talked with Coors about that, and we've sort of come up with about $750,000, which is $760,000 a year, which we should be putting into basically our savings account. And that's because the infrastructure is aging and failing, and we need to replace it. There is definitely the firefighting component. For Bamfield, we're going to be focusing on addressing there's so much to do that firefighting will come, and when we're going to be replacing a main, we want to make sure that we're putting it in at the right size so that it could fight fire, and we will eventually slowly build the system up to be capable of firefighting. But we don't want to go in and start upsizing a bunch of stuff that isn't at the end of its useful life. That's just, we do not have that luxury. So we're going to be focusing on basically addressing the aging water mains, replacing them. And if we're coming up to an area and it's a 4-inch in the ground and it's at the end of its useful life, what should that be in order to, if we were going to build the whole system to make fire flow, to meet fire flow, what do we know that needs to be? Let's install that in the ground now, so that that's not going to be the bottleneck for us. So with that being said, it's a very important thing to know what we want those sizes to be. West Bamfield Main is a really good, or the submarine line is a great example. We don't want to replace that with a 6-inch line because we're replacing it now. Let's replace it with the right size so that it's not going to be the problem when we move forward. And the other thing about fire flow is that it really goes hand in hand with increased growth and development. As we get infill, we're going to have higher demands, which is also going to increase that requirement to have more flow in the system. That's especially apparent when we've got 2-inch lines and 3-inch lines, which might not be able to service development in areas, right? So we need to look at that. So excellent report, and we've got a big gap is essentially where we're at. So our current existing capital reserve has just under $200,000. We're only really adding about $60,000 a year, and depends how we look at the financial plan, but at least for the next 2 years, that's what it looks like that we have as surplus in order to put into the capital renewal. That's significantly, so we see a huge gap basically between where we need to be and where we are. With that being said, we need to determine how do we cover that. So we listed a couple items in the report that we can look at as ways to generate revenue. So the first one is that we know that we're already seeing an increased development in Bamfield, and that we don't know exactly how much that's going to be, but we assume that it's going to be a lot, especially in comparison to what we've seen in the past, and a lot more than what we have been planning for with the OCP and previous future plans. So right now, the development cost charges bylaw, which was written in 1997, has some limitations, and a development cost charge bylaw. So as you see infill come into a water system, the more, if you put 5 more homes on the same water line, all of a sudden that water line needs to be upsized, and it fast tracks that project. So we say, okay, well, that water line replacement is actually needs to be done because of development. And so we associate the cost for some specific projects directly with development. And when we do a review, like a really in-depth review of a development cost charge bylaw and look at that, we basically look at all the projects, what the anticipated growth is going to be, where we're going to see that development, and then we can list out all of the projects that we say, no, these projects definitely will be fast-tracked because of development. Then we find out what that total cost is, and we can attribute that to the connections coming onto the system. It's not a quick process, and because there's a very high standard for that, because we want to make sure that the numbers are accurate, especially since, in some cases they could be significantly and very high, and so you want people to know that what they're putting forward is reasonable. So we really should do a DCC bylaw update. Regardless, I think that it was 1997 what was made. It is really out of date for so many reasons. Unfortunately, as we've been looking at this, and I had originally made a recommendation that we move forward with updating the DCC bylaw, we can't find good numbers to talk about development. And so we're going to probably have to go back and get that done first, which potentially looks like an OCP update, or some focused look at what are the population growths, what is development going to look like. And we need that information before we can really do a DCC assessment. And that's because it's a legislative process and it's very strict in how it runs. I still think we should start that process moving forward because it's important and needs to get done. However, I've also want to offer an alternative method because I don't see that moving forward for probably about 2 years. We do have an option to develop a more cost recovery model for the new water connection in turn. I spoke with our lawyer just to confirm, because my understanding is that a cost recovery water connection fee includes the physical cost of the connection, administration costs, basically all of the costs, and part of that actually can be what the renewal and replacement of a water system. So it actually, similar to a DCC, which is intended to be cost recovery, a water connection can be based on the same principles. And so that is something that we can look at as a tool for the intern. And it's the reason I propose it is that we have a lot of development coming online very soon. And if we don't update the DCCs and we don't put anything else in effect, there will be no contribution coming in from this increased development, which is going to put a lot of pressure on the system, which will then have to be borne by the rest of the taxpayers. So essentially the current residents in Bamfield will be in a way subsidizing the development until we get an appropriate DCC bylaw update done. So when we've looked at a very cursory level, and again, we didn't do the deep engineering and we made some assumptions, but if we were going to look at a cost recovery water connection fee, we've made an assumption that in the next 10 years, there would be 100 more water connections come on board. That may or may not happen. We don't have an OCP to say so. If we use that as the basis and we look at just the renewal costs that everyone would be paying in that time frame, it equals $25,000. So that is definitely would make those connections unaffordable. So if we were looking at something that was more affordable and we look at a relative rate to other systems, if we look at, I think it's Clulet or Beaver Creek, the rates are $3,500, $3,600. And those generally, especially for Beaver Creek, $3,600 is really just to cover the cost of installation plus administration. So it doesn't have a renewal component in there because they have a new DCC bylaw that covers those costs. So it's not in there, it actually gets covered with that cost. So I have proposed, I would like to propose to the committee that you consider passing a resolution to increase the water connection fees. Right now they are $1,100, and I'm suggesting something $5,000 when the cost probably, the actual cost would be in the range of $25,000. So any step forward for the interim is a good step. I would recommend to the committee. I would also like to say that just because we're bringing it to the committee now, it's an item for discussion, and we can always talk about this in more detail because this is a lot of information to be taking in to discuss about these items. The next one is simply water rates, which is what water rates are. So I also haven't really recommended a significant increase, but I have wanted to recommend that we do something. And if we just increase rates to calculate the CPI, at least we're making a small move forward. I think we need to look at this more to consider if we want more increases, but for the interim, knowing that we've got a huge funding gap, I strongly recommend that we do an increase just to accommodate CPI, which would increase the rate from $6 a month to $49 a month. And just one more item for thought that I thought of earlier today was that we have this other thing in Beaver Creek where we actually charge for secondary dwellings. So if you have a house and a carriage house in the back, you have 1 meter and it services both of those properties, but you pay your base rate, which is, I think for them it's $56 or $51 a month, but then you pay another base rate of $51, and then anything that you're over over your usage allowance. And because you're paying 2 base rates, you actually double your allowance. So I think it's 14 cubic meters is allowed. So if you were paying for 2 dwelling units, you would pay twice that, but you would also get allowed twice the minimum amount. I think that there might be in the range of 50 or 60 like secondary dwellings in Bamfield. So that might be a potential, but that's a big change. So there's going to be 50 or 60 places that have more than 1 dwelling unit, which would then see their base water rates double. So it's a tool that other water systems use. It's something that may want to be considered in Bamfield because there needs to be a way to generate revenue. One of the ways it's seen as is a more fair and equitable rate in a way. So, if you have, in theory, if you've got a house and you're renting out a carriage house, that's 2 families. So should they not be paying twice as much as other single family? And that was the basis of the concept that was used in Beaver Creek. So that was the last item of brainstorming some tools, and none of these are easy discussions because it all means having to pay more money. But this is an amazing water system. Now, especially, it is a huge water system servicing a small amount of people. It is run so well. We will talk next after we get through this about the annual report and just speaking to the high quality of water and the excellent level of service that is coming. So at least you are getting good value for your dollar, is maybe the last takeaway on that. And I think I've talked enough. I'm sure there are lots of questions. So I really appreciate everyone's time and consideration on this really important matter.
Jenny, before we turn it over to questions and answers, you were telling me about, sorry, was it Cherry Creek, or one of the communities that was financially in the same situation? Was it Beaver Creek, the same situation that we find ourselves in now, where they have over the last decade or so gotten themselves out from underneath this debt?
It was Beaver Creek, and actually it was our planning general manager who reminded me of this, because we were talking about this, this is such a challenging situation for Bamfield. What can we do? How do we do this? And he said, it's tough. It's tough right now from where you are, but we were in that spot, 10, 15 years ago in Beaver Creek, and we saved up money. And in the last 3 years that I've been there, and the year prior, they've done a major water renewal project every year. And we've seen leakage has just dropped off. Operating costs because of emergency repairs has dropped off. And they're just dealing with those aging problematic water mains. And it's a process that you get used to. And so they're so much further along, and it always depends where your perspective is. And so it was really nice that he gave me that shift to say, it's tough now, but in 10 years, in 20 years, we're going to look back and hopefully thank ourselves for, you have to start at some point, right? So we've just got the data in front of us telling us how much money we need to put away. And that has to start at some point. So we're at year zero, but we will be at year 20 one day.
And thank you for that, Jenny. And I just want to add that, I've only been a director for 2.5 years, and my learning curve has been really, really steep. And, along with some milestones that I think are important, including the strategic plan, one of the most important things that we've done as a regional government is start to develop these asset management plans. And as difficult as they are, and whether it's replacing fire trucks, parks, needs, the water treatment plant. One of the most difficult things that we're asked to do, now I say us, we collectively, is to look to the future and plan 10 years out and 15 years out, because I don't want to be remembered as, what the hell did that guy do? 10 years from now, when this community is struggling, because we struggled with making some difficult decisions. So again, from a leadership perspective, I encourage everyone to ask the tough questions tonight, get the information that we need, and then collectively let's come together with some decisions that will allow our community to flourish, years from now. So I'll turn it over to everyone, and thank you in advance for your well thought out questions and comments.
I guess I have a quick question. It's
Well, I'm happy to start.
it's looking like it's going to be tax. Oh, can everybody hear me?
Go ahead.
I was going to start.
Yeah, go ahead.
My turn, Barry. I was just going to say that it's looking like it's going to be very tax heavy in the next few years, especially when it comes to the water system. We have fire trucks coming online, so things are going up nonetheless. I'm wondering, is it in anyone at the ACRD's portfolio to seek out grants and things that could help out communities with this type of thing? With the way the government's been handing out money the last year and a half, how difficult would it be to find $2 to $5 million to help with this kind of thing?
We definitely do. We actually recently have added grants to our asset manager's portfolio. Unfortunately, she's also been absconded to help the city with their asset management plan, so we're having a smaller portion of her time available. Regardless, we are absolutely accessing everything available. We have applied for the investing in Canadian infrastructure planning grant rural fund for the West Bamfield transmission line. And I think Eddie actually checked in to see if we've heard yet. I know that they keep saying on their website, we will let you know by midsummer. So we had expected something a little sooner. And as those grants come available, we're always looking at them for sure.
Can we tie Eddie's probation into the grant? Would that be appropriate? I'm only kidding. Chief, I can tell you that I have many chats with Terry Fong regarding grants all the time. With respect to parking and everything else. We've struggled a bit with staffing at ACRD. And as Jenny just said, we've just brought on additional staff because we recognize that there's going to be additional demands. It's not just Bamfield that's growing. The entire region is taking off, and we've had to bring the staffing levels to a point where we had these folks that had the time to flush these things out and find these grants and find this funding for us, because like all small communities, we're all struggling. But that's a great question, and I can honestly say, Phil, I'm very confident that the ACRD staff are working very hard to find alternate funding for us. Go ahead, Barry. Go ahead, Barry, if you can hear us.
Okay, I'm only hearing about 40%. I guess my connection's not that great. Bridges are long standing, of course. I've been here a long time, and I know that I'm a bit old school, but I've always taken the point that historically we've had very bad engineering and very bad advice. And we've had rainy day funds that have been spent in ways that I didn't think very, very efficient. But anyway, I used to do this kind of stuff, and I quantified some of these numbers with people that still do it. So when I hear the numbers, and I understand now there's a larger picture with the firefighting and the other infrastructure that needs to come in, read the size of mains, things like that. But when I hear $1,800, well, I know how that works. And when I hear $3,600 for a connection, and that's only the costs, boy, I know I could give you a list of 3 guys that would jump at the chance to put in connections at $1,800 a piece. So if we're trying to sell this to the actual public, it's a very difficult job. And I know that we have an aging system, I get that, but to come up with these kind of numbers with people that are aware of things, that's very difficult to come up with a cost that's $3,600. I think in the Beaver Creek area, that's only covering the cost and not including the meter. I think in the stuff I read, I have a hard time with those numbers. Now, if it's for the greater good, I get it. But to try and justify that way and to say that we want to get another month for water rates, well, that was that's $600 a year. That's a substantial increase. So at any rate, I'll leave those comments, and we'll digest all this material. And I do have to be somewhere in 10 or so minutes, and I'm having a very hard time. I hope you're hearing me. I'm having a time hearing everybody else. I get about 40%. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Barry. And I'm going to ask Jenny maybe to quickly respond. I agree with Barry that it's important that we be as transparent as possible, and certainly to be able to provide the Water Commission with the necessary information that will allow us to sell it to our community. So I'm wondering, Jenny, if you and staff are able to get back to Barry in the not too distant future with some facts and figures that will quantify some of the costs.
I can provide, I can definitely provide some more backup information on that in written format. Are we talking specifically about the connection fees?
Yeah. I did a small workup, Jenny, just and I quantified these with a couple of people that I know that still do this actively. So just to talk about a straight connection fee, never mind upsizing lines and everything. A small machine excavator, $100 an hour. Even if you said it took 4 hours, you should only need an hour. It should be an hour for a machine time. 2 men at $50 an hour could easily do that job. There's stuff on the market that you can either do that hot with the line still charged. You have a sleeve that goes over the pipe. You clamp it all down. It's got a valve there. Drill in. You, as soon as you finish your drilling, you take a drill out and you turn the valve off. Then you run your other stuff in. But at any rate, if you did all that, and I said at $100 an hour for machine time, let's say 4 hours, that's $400. 2 men at $50 an hour, that's $100 an hour. 4 hours, that's $400. That's $800. You look at a meter material, $1,000. That's the real cost, and that's really, really a difficult situation, having to bring people over, whatever, because it's West Bamfield. That's extremely high. And I talked to one chap who said at $1,800 per connection, he could do 10 a day if they were reasonably close. He'd be making $18,000 a day, and he would do that all day long. So that's the kind of thing, there's a lot more people that are hands-on here, and that's the kind of thing that you have a hard time selling when you're trying to come up with when you're saying these numbers to quantify that. So I'm going to thank you guys for your time here. I'll be here for another 5 minutes, then I do have to go. But I go to follow up with you, Jenny, over the course of time.
Yeah, and I will speak just a little bit.
We can share with the public. Sure.
I'll speak
Yep.
that before you go, Barry, and I agree. We're missing a bit of what you're saying as well. So what the actual cost is not $5,000. What we're saying is that there is sort of other components that go into it. So the cost recovery being the actual cost of installation, which you're right, is probably around the range of $1,800, which is why we have it set at that. But then it's the other costs that we're looking at, which is putting money away for renewal and replacement of the water system. And we're saying that, if we look at the numbers, that's probably more in the $25,000 range, but we don't want to charge someone $26,000 for a water connection because it really now makes that connection unaffordable. And so we know we need it to be closer to that. And we've looked at neighboring sites to try and at least bring it more in the range. And so the water connection fee would not necessarily be the physical cost of connection, but it's trying to be the cost of the impact on the water system and the physical cost with the new rate.
So if I could add to that, Jenny, we recently did an upgrade to our water plant, and all of the homeowners ended up having a significant increase, and we had an option to either pay the one-time amount or a monthly amount. Is that not correct?
I think it was an annual amount. It's like once lump sum or annually, possibly.
Okay. And I just look at the money that I'm paying as a taxpayer. Someone new comes here, builds a place, then I guess I am looking at that individual to help invest in the water system, not just the connection to the house, but to invest in this system that we've all had to pay and bought in. So I'm just thinking out loud, because I agree with Barry. We got to be able to, rationalize and sell this to the community. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
JP here. I've got some questions.
Great, JP.
Just looking for a bit of background on the fire flow, and where I'm coming from here is just wanting to have kind of open conversation about like the level, the kind of target goal for that is where we're going, and kind of like, I guess looking backwards as like, has that been an actual problem with the system? Because one unfortunate side of increasing or building the system to that is it's going to greatly increase the overhead costs and future maintenance going forward to maintain a system that has, fire flows capable of some like the identified targets, but it's also like this water system is only a small fraction of that capacity is actually functioning for delivering water. It's mostly there just for fire flow, and that's like what's driving the fire flow thing, I guess. What's the background on that? Because it's really driving a lot of these costs, and will continuously increase overhead costs of the system going forward. So the problem we're finding ourselves in today, if we upgrade the system to achieve all those fire flows, are the expected properties that we'll have, or hookups or ongoing like water users actually going to be able to effectively maintain that? Or we just doubled our system, we haven't doubled the users, and now we're just going to be, we kicking this down the road another 80 years, and we're just kind of in the same place with all the pipes are bigger, we've got our fire flows, we don't have a whole hell of a lot of users, or enough users to kind of like justify that. And so can you just speak a bit to that, please?
Through the chair, thank you. And I might, Chris, if you want to hop in on some of these concepts. The fire flow, I think, is important for us to know what it needs to be sized at if we're building to that. And the other thing is that where Bamfield sits today, and I don't know until we do the study, but someone mentioned to me that, I don't hate to say this, but right now Bamfield is what Tofino was 30 years ago, or those kinds of things. So a lot of it is thinking it's not just fire flow, it's also going to be increased demand and development. And also a good perspective is, I come into the system and I see 2-inch and 3-inch connections going down lines, and it just means that now any other development and growth on that line needs to now replace that line to make it larger. And so it really limits the available growth if we allow undersized water lines to get built in the water system. Chris, I guess another question to you is, yes, we have to, like, some of the big projects like adding more reservoir storage and things like that are so low down on the priority list. It's really a far in the future to I don't know when, but a lot of them are more just bringing up to a minimum 6-inch water line. And there's not that much of a nominal cost to install 6-inch water lines per se, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of the initial cost just to put a new pipe in the ground. And then it gets incrementally more depending on the diameter of the pipe, because the physical cost, the material goes up, but it's not, generally it's the labor is the cost, the equipment and the machinery and the manpower to put the pipe in the ground. So yeah, that sort of addresses your comment, Jenny. What's the difference between maybe a 4-inch or a 6-inch pipe? Material wise, it's maybe, you know, $20 a meter difference between a 4-inch and a 6-inch. It's not significant. The other components start to increase a little bit, the size of the saddle and whatnot, but I won't get into all those specific details, but it's not a big item to go from a 4 to a 6, go to 4 to a 10. It's significantly more cost because the material pipes cost has gone up. But what drives fire flows, it's really a function of the level of fire protection to be provided in the community. And the Fire Underwriter Survey of Canada produces recommended minimum fire flows based on the type of structure that's there. And then they'll do an audit, and the Fire Underwriter Survey, they provide insurance for, I'm assuming, the ACRD, and they'll do an assessment on your different size structures in each of your water communities. And they'll tell you this is the minimum fire flow demand you need for that structure. And then that's sometimes used to make sure that the system can deliver that flow. And the Fire Underwriter Survey, what they do is they're an underwriter for property owners who come and say, we'd like to have insurance for our home. The fire underwriters will do a study for another insurance company, and they'll say, well, are you within 300 meters of a fire hydrant? If its answer is yes, then your insurance premiums drop. If there is no fire protection in your area, or either more than 300 meters, then your insurance costs go up because the risk to the insurance company is increased. There's a greater likelihood that if there's a fire, the whole structure will be destroyed and they'll have to pay out more money. Therefore, your insurance premiums go up. It's similar to an automobile. Safe drivers, you get a discount. Fire systems, if you're near a fire hydrant, if you have a good firefighting system is in place, you have good firefighting equipment, your insurance premiums go down for the municipality, and then those are transferred over to the homeowner as well, if they live within that community. But it really comes down to the size of the structure, if the building is sprinklered or not sprinklered, what's the likelihood of a fire breaking out, and how close is the buildings beside it. So will there be a carryover from one structure to another? So instead of just having one home, you have multiple homes on fire. Those all come into play in assessing, well, how much water do we need to put the fire out? And just as a side note, a lot of the materials in a home now are petroleum based, like your carpets, your clothing, your furniture, all of your electronics, they're petroleum based. And so they ignite very quickly and burn very rapidly. And so fires spread extremely quickly in new homes compared to a home that was built in the 1950s. And I remember seeing on YouTube just 2 years ago, down in the United States, one of the underwriting fire companies did an example of what a fire looked like in a 1950s home versus a 1990s home. And they took a cigarette butt and they stuck it under a pillow under a couch. A typical example of someone maybe falling asleep or dropping their cigarette, and it just burns away. And they videoed them to show how fast that fire spread. And in the 1950s home, it took 2 hours for the couch to catch on fire and before it started spreading to the drapes. In the 1990s home, it took 5 minutes before that entire room was fully engulfed in flames. You see the big billowing black smoke pouring out of the windows. That just gives you an idea of the challenges that we face today in our modern society and the types of fires. And for those fires that are in homes, you need large volumes of water very quickly to put that fire out and to stop it from spreading. So that just gives you a little bit of a side note on firefighting capabilities and what you're looking at. And a lot of the systems now are built to protect life, not necessarily to preserve the structures, but to stop the fire from spreading to other structures. That becomes the primary driver now in firefighting, because once the fire starts in a home, it's very, very difficult to stop it from fully engulfing the home and and trying to preserve it. Phil, you may be able to speak more to that than I can.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. I think I've seen that same YouTube video of, you know, within minutes, it's a very dangerous and deadly environment. And that, you know, the water flow for firefighting is a huge component to our insurance rating from the underwriters. You know, it's not just the trucks and the training and everything, but it is the ability for our water system to supply enough. Yeah, so, you know, we do have a fairly rough rating these days. A lot of people's fire insurance has gone up, mine included, by a good 20-25% over the last couple of years. And yeah, this the water infrastructure is a gigantic component of their calculations.
Chief, if I could add to JP, again, thinking 10 years down the road, that under the building code and fire code, if we don't upgrade, future development will be restricted just by the code. So that, you know, if someone wanted to build a retirement home, or they wanted to build an apartment complex for seasonal employees or tourism employees, they're going to be limited to certain sizes of construction based on the water flow or the inability to provide sprinkler systems. So again, I'm trying to look down the road and go, what do we need to ensure that we can meet the demands of tomorrow? And the other thing to keep in mind as well is that an existing commercial property in Bamfield today, if it burned down, there's a potential that it may not be able to be rebuilt to its square footage, again, under the building code and current fire codes being, you know, having changed over the years, and again, based on water. I'm not sure, Chris or Chief, if you wanted to, you know, to add to that, but those are two concerns that I have as well in not considering a staged approach to, you know, changing the lines, the size of lines in time.
Nope, I don't have anything to add.
I've got another question.
Yeah, please.
So it seems like we haven't kind of properly identified why some of our infrastructure is failing prematurely, like some of it 50% of its life. At 50% of its life, we're having like significant failures. And so if we are replacing some of these submarine lines, what is it that we're actually changing and expecting to be different going forward?
I'll definitely let Mr. Holmes speak to that a bit. We talked about that earlier today. The Bamfield West Main transmission line is a submarine line, and it underwent like undue tear and wear by marine traffic. So it wasn't necessarily, I don't think it was designed to be pulled for an extended period of time by an anchor. However, even given that, I think that that it might not have been installed to the specifications that we would have expected that it had been installed to. But Chris, did you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, sorry, I lost the connection there, so I didn't hear all of JP's question.
I was just asking, Chris, for the submarine line, I guess specifically, is that a lot of that, a lot of it seems to be failing prematurely. So have we properly identified like what the actual problem is, and what are we changing going forward if we're going to be replacing those assets?
Oh, okay.
So we don't have this problem again.
An excellent question, and it's a difficult one to answer in its entirety. But Yeah, as Jenny said, she and I were actually talking about that earlier this day, and what causes the failure of an HDPE pipe. And I'm not really sure what the cause of the failures are, but I know there's been a number of them. But I suspect, as Jenny alluded to, that it's been external forces on the pipe that has stressed the pipe beyond its yield strength. And so the pulling of the pipe with the boat anchor and dragging it has created forces on it that it's not normally designed to endure. And so it's weakened the pipe itself. And then failure is occurring. And it seems to be occurring, from what I understand, where the joints are on the pipe, where the two pieces of pipe are welded together. And I don't have a lot of experience with HDPE welded pipe, but in my university days, I took a course on metallurgical engineering, and we did a class in welding where we went out in the shop, we actually welded plates together. And one of the things we were informed of was that when you weld two pieces of metal together, the weld is actually stronger than the metal itself. The weld becomes the strongest point. And when failure occurs in metal that's been welded together, it occurs just beyond the weld point, because that metal has been heat stressed and turned molten, and it's a little bit thinner. And so that's where the weakness occurs. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily true for HDE pipe, but if it is, when the pipe is fused together, the two pieces of plastic or high density polyethylene is turned to molten, and then they're pushed together, and it creates a seamless joint, then the failure would be occurring just outside of where that joint is, because that's where the pipe would be the weakest. Now, if those two pipes, when they're heated and pushed together, if for some reason the temperature wasn't right, or the way they're pushed together isn't quite perfect, or they're not allowed to cool in place for a long enough time before they're moved again, then that bond between those two pieces of pipe is weak, naturally weaker than the rest of the pipe. And as the HD pipe it allows to flex, it can expand and contract. HD pipe, it's malleable. And as it does that, at that joint where it's not as strong as the rest of the pipe, it will then create stresses in it, and it will cause a failure. And whether that's a complete failure where the pipe breaks right apart, or whether it just occurs at one spot and a weakness opens up, and then that's where water begins to escape, and it'll start to spread and propagate from that. So that's my knowledge of HDPE pipe. How do you stop that in the future? Well, certainly the technologies that we have today and the quality control we have with HD pipe are superior to the past. So you can get a better quality pipe, you get a thicker walled pipe. So that's how you can address the issue of the quality of the material and how it's joined together. Addressing boat anchors, that's a harder one. You can put armoring over top of the pipe. There's different ways of doing that, or you can embed the pipe in the ground if you have the ability to do that. I think you might have some challenges on some parts of the ocean floor between East and West Bamfield, where the pipe just can't get buried, or you can bury it, but because of the tidal currents over time, the pipe will be exposed. And so you can install mats that go over top of the pipe, and it'll be a rock type structure that you lay over top of the pipe to protect from boat anchors being drawn over top of it. And that comes with additional cost. So it becomes a balancing act between cost versus benefit. And or you look at another route where there's less boat traffic there. But the odds are that it was put in that location for a reason, and finding another route is probably going to be longer. It's going to cost more money, and you could go overland, but it would be a lot more money, because you have to go all the way down to the south and back up to the west. And, that's just probably unrealistic at this stage. So those are the types of options you have, but protecting submarine pipelines is a challenge.
Go ahead, John.
I can just speak a little bit to what Chris was speaking about, having worked on this pipeline. The type of well that Chris was speaking of is not present on this pipeline. So the butt ends of the pipe, where they touch together, they're very clean and smooth, as though they had never been fused. And outside the pipe, there is a bead of weld, like someone used a glue gun and went around and welded it. So they're not fused completely through the pipe like you would with a metal weld at all. And all of the breaks, the pipeline in east to west Bamfield and the pipeline in Grappler Inlet are the same product. They're half-inch thick Sclair pipe. And all of that pipeline is the same, was installed at the same time by the same installers, and it is of the same product. The one in Grappler, I've swam it from end to end very many times. The only leaks or break in that pipe, none of them are welds. They are all man-made, from bullet holes to propellers. Mainly, that's it. They're all done by some mechanical outside force on that pipe. That's the only way it's ever leaked. The one in Grappler, or the one in Bamfield Inlet from east to west, same product. It has never leaked up until just, I can't remember exactly, 3 years ago, Jenny, something like that. And it was identified that the pipe has been dragged quite a ways off its old path where it's been for 40 years. And at the same time, nobody knows who did this, but the anchor is still there. It's a fairly heavy anchor, would have been moved probably with a hydraulic winch to move it that way, in a fairly powerful boat, because it's been dragged well off its path. And all of the repairs or all of the fractures on that pipe are only on the joints. There's been no other man-made break in between the joints. So every repair we've made has been on the joint itself. And all of those joints show the same way, with a thin layer of fabrication externally and internally on the pipe, but the butt faces of the pipe together are not fused at all. They're not in any way, they've never been melted. They're very clean and smooth. That's all I have.
Thanks, John. No other questions, no comments? So we do have, go ahead.
Yeah, one more question to Chris, I presume. Is there any chance of lifting this pipe, or severing it, lifting it, and re-welding these joints? Is that something that's ever been done? I don't know where that would go.
Yeah. It probably could be done, but my experience is that anytime you're dealing with older equipment, the moment you try and repair it, it creates other issues.
Mhm.
You know, it's the old example. I don't know if it's an appropriate one, but you've got an old pair of jeans and they're torn, and you sew a patch on it, and then it begins to fail where you sewed the patch on. You know, and you work on a car and your muffler is rusted out, so you replace your muffler, but then the pipe that you're connecting to the muffler to, it's got problems, and you begin to chase it further and further up so you get up to the exhaust manifold. And you know, I've seen it time and time again, when you try and repair something, you keep chasing it over and over again. It keeps creeping up beyond where you just did your work.
Yeah, the pipe could be brittle itself.
Yeah.
Fatigued. Mhm.
So yeah, that's a tough one.
Mhm.
I mean, you could try it, but it might just be throwing good money after a bad situation, and it's better to bite the bullet and just replace the whole thing if you can.
Mhm. Yeah, well, the repairs we've made on it are only temporary. They're not going to stay there forever.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, let's hope Betty gets that grant for us.
And I guess one more question, Chris, is it logical in any whether it's submarine or subsurface, to twin pipes so that you've got, say, 2 6-inch pipes instead of 1 12-inch pipe? Does that have any benefit?
Well, it does, but it actually wouldn't. You'd probably have to go to like a 6 and an 8-inch to replace just 1 12-inch, just because of the diameter, pi r squared, the area of a pipe. 2 6 inches are smaller than the area that a 12-inch provides. Well, yeah, there is some benefits to that. It's a bit more costly, and it gets more complicated on the shorelines. You then have to bring the 2 pipes together and whatnot. But yeah, there are benefits to it.
I guess my thoughts were, I realize the extra costs and having to build manifolds on the beach and everything. My thoughts were, in this particular situation, even if we would have had 2 smaller pipes, 1 may be intact, and we could shut 1 down and still maintain 50% or 30% of our flow volume if there was more than 1. That was my question.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. Good questions. JP, had you finished your questions and comments?
Yeah, that thing is fine for now.
Okay. So Jenny, looking at 4B, there are, there's 1 motion, but there's 3 parts to that motion. And I just want to get clarification that the 3rd part of that motion, that the Bamfield Water Committee recommends the ACRD Board of Directors approve proceeding with the development cost DCC update at a cost of $20,000. I wasn't sure if you had deviated off of that and you were advising we go a different direction. Can you speak to that just so I'm clear?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would recommend that we actually consider, I would actually, if I can alternate and put a different resolution in front of the committee, I would recommend that the Bamfield Water Advisory Committee recommend that the ACRD Board of Directors approve the increase of a new water connection fee to $5,000 per each dwelling unit as a consideration. And I would say we actually don't need to pass the previous resolution because we won't be doing that in this financial budget year. So we can put it into the financial plan process for 2022.
Okay, so just for clarification then, for the committee, this motion would have the 3 parts then, to receive the report from Corps Engineering, to approve a water rate increase to $49 a month, and to increase the fee to $5,000. Is that correct, Jenny? That's the motion, albeit abbreviated.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so because it says "and" after each of the paragraphs, it means it's 1 motion. Is that correct, Jenny?
Yes, I guess. I apologize for that because I actually would have, it should be 3 separate motions. And if you'd like, I can just in the minutes delete the ands and we can address them individually.
I think that'll be easier from a process standpoint and for discussion on each of the motions. So if the committee has no objection, that's how I would like to proceed. And the easiest motion to start with would be that we receive the report from Corps Engineering. Could I have a mover and a seconder on that, please?
Make that motion.
John, thank you. Seconded by?
I'll second that, JP.
Thanks, JP. Any discussions about the receipt of the report? Are there any objections to passing this motion? Hearing none, then the first motion has been approved. Thank you very much. The second motion then, that the Bamfield Water Committee recommends that the ACRD Board of Directors approve a water rate increase to $49 per month as of July 1st, 2021. Now, if I can get that moved and seconded, and then we can have discussion on that.
Move that.
Moved by John. Do we have a seconder?
JP.
Second. Oh, JP beat me to it.
Okay. Hi, Lisa.
Thanks, JP. Discussion, comments? That being the case, is there anyone opposed to this increase?
I just want to ask, does that mean we can get a little bit more for the gardens? Seems like
Jenny,
our-
did you want to respond to that?
Did you say garments?
Gardening.
Garden.
So yeah, summertime, I find I hit my threshold a little bit and go over a little bit. So if we're paying this much more monthly, could the threshold be considered increased by a cubic meter or so here and there?
So if you did that, there would be a consequential reduction in revenues. So it might have a counter effect. Those two are connected because we do have not just the fixed revenues, but then also the amounts. I'd have to do a real analysis, like just to see, because we do have all the detailed data, what that would look like specifically. I know no one goes over their amounts in the winter, but, or I don't think many people do. But in the summer, there would be a potential reduction in revenue. So it would be, that would be the consequence of increasing the volume.
Would that be a showstopper for you, Chief?
Not necessarily, but it would be nice.
Okay.
An extra garden hose from Al's property.
Sure. They're rarely here.
All right. Hearing none, motion approved. Thank you very much. And the third motion was that the Bamfield Water Committee recommends that the ACRD Board of Directors approve proceeding with a hookup fee increase to $5,000, or words similar to that, Jenny.
That's correct. And it is per dwelling unit.
Per dwelling unit. Okay, well, again, if someone would like to move and second that, then we can have debate and discussion on that and then a vote.
So moved, JP.
JP, thank you. Seconded.
I'll second it.
Thank you, John. Okay, debate, discussion, comments, please.
I'd like to try and find a better wording for it so that people don't misunderstand, like Barry commented earlier, that we know it doesn't cost that much money to install a meter. Depending on the situation and the ground that has to be broken or rock that has to be broken, it's rarely going to come to $5,000. And I don't know what the actual cost of a meter itself is. But I think if we could come up with a change of wording as far as connection, when people think of a connection and anybody watches it get done, they can see that in 2 hours or 3 hours, the connection is done and the meter's installed. Why would it cost $5,000? So I understand why we have to do this. And I also help install the meters and I know how long it takes, but I I may have to install 5 more myself in our property. So I'd like to express it some way to the community that there's a better understanding of what the money's for.
Off the top of my head, the one that comes to mind is we call it a new water connection fee. We could call it a new water service fee. I'm like, because that would still, and we just would have to put a definition into the bylaw. We can call it whatever we want as long as we define it adequately in the bylaw.
And I think maybe, when somebody's applying for it, that they have some sort of propaganda that explains to them why this fee is this much money, that it's laid out in why, because it's not just for the hookup of a meter.
That we can do.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would use the word propaganda because we're dealing with facts here. I'm just giving you a bad time, John.
No,
I like the idea. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
I know I was joking, but we need some way of communicating what the real reason for this is, so that people would feel like they're being ripped off, just like Barry tried to explain. It's not logical that we just let people think it's only for a hookup.
Right. Really, it's interesting. If I just step back for a moment, it's almost like a cooperative that we have. We all own a piece of this water system. And if you want to be part of this water system, there's a cost associated with it, especially as we try to build our coffers in order to replace it and upgrade it as we move forward. So I'm inclined to agree with you, John. I think, Jenny, we need to have really good communications, both, as we move this forward and as people take out their applications for these hookups, because we're not trying to screw anyone here. We're trying to ensure that we provide the leadership so that our community will flourish. Any other comments or questions regarding this last motion?
Yeah, I had one. I'm curious, once this is in place, will it be applied to existing building permits who have not yet hooked up to the system, or just new building permits?
So the process goes like this. People go and get a building permit, and at the same time, they're given a water application form. They can go through the building permit process as they want to. Part of the requirement is to get an approved water application form filled in. And so then that goes into their building file, which allows them to continue with the building. For the water application form, if you don't have an approved form in process and you haven't paid your fees and gotten your signed form back, then if you haven't received that before we make this change, the new fee would be applied to it now.
And from a timing standpoint, Jenny, going to the board and, approval, et cetera, when would that be?
Our next available board meeting is on, I think, June 9th. So the next one is the 26th, but the agenda is basically done on that. So we would be looking to take this, the soonest would be on June 9th.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could just interject, the issue you're raising is not an unusual one, and typically it's been covered through DCCs, development cost charge, but DCCs are very structured and regulated by the province on who pays them and who doesn't pay them. And so one of our other municipal clients, to help sort of address this equitable fairness of, you have this infrastructure that's built in place and been paid for by the current users, and someone else comes along and says, well, I want to have access to that, but they fall outside of the DCC cost charge. So they're asking to have the benefit of now being connected to the system, either because the municipality's boundaries have expanded and they're taking in new properties that are fully developed, and maybe had their own on-site wells, and now they want to have access to a municipal system. Well, under the DCC Governments Act, they don't pay DCCs because they're not subdividing, they're an existing dwelling. So they can't be charged a DCC rate. So the municipality came up with what they call a capital cost charge, or a CCC. And it is identical to the same charge as the DCC, but it applies to existing developments. That it's their cost that they have to pay to have access to a system that others have already paid for. And it's they're prorated based on sort of the same cost as the DCC. So that's the terminology they use. And Jenny, I can send you some information about that, tomorrow through an email. You can look further into it. That might be something you might want to call it a capital cost charge, not just a service connection fee.
So Chris, just a follow-up to that, is that in the bylaw, just in the bylaw as another fee?
I believe so, yes. I'm not overly familiar with exactly how they charge it and the basis, but I believe it is. They passed it, they have a DCC bylaw, and then they have, I believe, a CCC bylaw.
Mm-hmm. We can look at that as the wording. I would like to look into that. And I'm just thinking that we can look at that and we can still work out the details. If the committee passes the resolution for $5,000 for a new connection fee, regardless, we would move forward with that to the board with the intention that whatever we did was, whether it was we kept a connection charge at $1,800 and the difference at a capital cost charge, we would make sure that the total was only ever $5,000, so that we would be going with the intent of this resolution. So, but I really like that idea, Chris, and I'd like to look into that more. I'd also want to check with our lawyer again, because I did check to make sure that, this is, and it's, you can recover those costs in a service connection fee. So I just want to check and see what the construction cost charge rules and regulations might be, to see if we could, if that would fit for us.
Yep.
Thank you.
For those who know Barry, and I'm looking at you, John, that approach that Jenny just mentioned, that the hookup fee is $1,800 and the capital investment is $3,200. Do you think that would be more palatable for Barry?
Oh, we can't hear you, John.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be for Barry, but as we have to convince community members of why we're doing this, it alleviates the argument of that Barry had. So it is, as Chris pointed out, it's twofold. It is the cost development and the capital cost recoup. We have to do it somehow. We need the money. We can't ignore it. We either have to increase our taxes, or our tax requisition for our water system, or we have to recoup it in some other manner. This comes out to, I know, over 30 years, $167 a year at $5,000 for a hookup. I don't want to see it either, but on a system that is as small as ours, there is no way that we can just maintain it and increase it. And we know the history that there was great resistance 20 and 30 years ago to any increases of water fees, or even putting in meters to meter the water, or to try and build up a capital. So we know we have to do this. There's no way around it, but it's just a way to convey it to the community of how we're doing it. For most of us, it isn't going to make any difference because we're not getting any connection. And for someone spending $500,000 on a new development, it's a small portion, and it's going to be recouped when they sell the property. And in turn, for others, like Phil, your property value will increase because yours is already connected. So when it comes time for you to sell, you will get the extra $5,000 value in your property just because it's already there.
Okay.
I convinced
Any-
myself yet?
I think you are. I think you absolutely are. Okay, so Jenny, our motion has morphed a little bit. Do we need to change that to reflect that we're looking for perhaps a different approach? What's your thoughts?
In this case, if it was going to the board, we would have to be specific and it would have to be word for word because we'd be passing it. This resolution will be as a recommendation to the regional district board. So I'll do a cover report to the board and say what was discussed and what recommendation was given to the board. And if we look at adjusting that, I'll discuss why we're looking to adjust it. And any of those changes will be to the intent that it will be $5,000 per dwelling unit. How we work out those details, we might tweak wording appropriately. And I hope that the committee assumes that our judgment will be solid on that. If we need to or look at veering anywhere off that, we would come back to the committee with another meeting if we needed to make significant changes. But I think with this, as long as we have the intent that there is an understanding that the cost would be $5,000 and that would include, that a portion of that is the actual cost plus the portion that we want dedicated to the water system, that we will make sure that we update the bylaw to appropriately reflect that.
Okay, so committee members, commission members, are you okay then with staff running with this, knowing the discussion that we've had, and that they are going to have to get some advice from the lawyer as to what we can and cannot do with the terminology? Anyone object to staff going ahead with this? I'm not hearing anyone say no. So that brings me back to the motion. It was moved and seconded. Are there anyone opposed to this motion? Hearing none, motion is approved. Thank you very much for that discussion, everyone. We'll now move on to item 5A, Bamfield Water Systems 2020 Annual Report. Again, Jenny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel like this should have gone first. It's, or maybe it's a good note. So we had a good year in the water system. Obviously, the big item of note is that we had a lot of issues on the west main transmission line, which we've all spoken about. And due to the repairs of a lot of those leaks, we think that actually might have reduced a bit of the leakage. There was a lot of water repair that happened. It's hard to say because of some of those leaks we might not have noticed until they became significant. So we did see a small reduction in the water leakage from 33% in 2019 down to 25%. It's still higher than we want it to be, but we are getting there. It's an older system, obviously, and we're talking about trying to generate revenue to replace these older, slowly failing water lines. So we will see that if we start to do more renewal. The operating costs were a little bit higher. And again, we had a lot of costs associated with doing diving and repairs on the water lines. So that is completely understandable. We still met our targets for that. We mentioned, well, maybe not, we have set a new target for infrastructure renewal and looking to put money away to contribute to capital. And when we finished the annual report, we did not have the Corps report. And at that time, we were hoping to be contributing $905. And that was on our sort of very rough estimates of what the water system cost of renewal and what the lifespan would be. And we know now that that's much higher. But we are still below that. We are currently in 2020, we contributed $245 on average per connection. And so with the changes that we're making today, hopefully that will be increasing that number for 2021. Overall, water consumption was down due to COVID, significantly due to COVID. So we'll see that sort of a lingering effect of that. Otherwise, again, the water system was run just incredibly well, as it always is every year, with a great, sincere gratitude to our water operator, who does a fantastic job, and everyone who helps with that, John Mass as well, with all of the diving that he's been doing and the assistance with the repair work, and everyone else in the community who's been helping out. So we really appreciate that. And this report is just here for receipt. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those. Bob, I think we lost you on your phone and you're on mute on your Zoom. We're pretty close to the end. I bet you, I don't know if you're able to unzoom, but I think we can probably manage a delay for the last little bit of the meeting if you wanted to just unmute your Zoom, your computer Zoom.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank goodness. Thank you, Jenny, for that. I'm wondering if Les, given the fact that he is the father caretaker of this wonderful system, Les, we should give you an opportunity just to give us your thoughts. I know you do great work. You're very proud of what we have. Any comments and thoughts about tonight's meeting and the direction that we're going?
No comments. No public comments.
Well, thank you for all your work. Commission members, any comments or questions for Jenny, Les, regarding the report? Well, I just want to echo Jenny's thoughts. It's a very small community. We've got what I consider a world-class water system for this small community, and how grateful I am to have this system. So thank you, staff, for putting this together, and for Les looking after us and keeping us safe. Are there any other? Is there any other late business? Is there any other comments that the commission would like to make before we sign off tonight?
JP here, just a quick question for Jenny.
Go ahead, JP.
Jenny, in your email, there's a section you mentioned, over the next 10 years, we need to contribute 7.6 million for the capital renewal program. So what's that? Where did that come from? I didn't see that in any of the agenda.
So what that recommendation, so in the Coors report, it looked at it, the draft report that was on the agenda provided a range of something to 590, sorry, just trying to move that back. I think it was 1.3 to $590,000 a year, if I remember correctly. So in talking with Coors, when we looked at that, I said, okay, that range is great, but what would be, like an actual number if we're looking at the estimates? And so they have done some updates for what will be the final report. And what we're looking at is 760,000, which is sort of in the middle range of that range, which is an appropriate amount. So what we need to be putting away in theory, and this doesn't include it actually doesn't include the fire flow stuff. So although we've got that in the plan, it's not what we're looking for to put away. We're just looking at replacement of the water system. So it's $760,000 a year for 10 years. That's what it is. And then depending on how many connections we have, we divide that by that to come up with the number.
The 20s. Okay, gotcha now. Yep. And that's where we're just not anywhere near that. So that's the hole we're crawling out of.
Yeah. And that's okay, because we'll just keep closing the gap. And so tonight we've made some decisions that start to close that gap, and we'll just continue to move forward.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a great question, JP, and I'm glad you finished it off and framed it that way, Jenny, because, you know, I had the conversation about we're not going to fix this overnight, but we have to start somewhere, and this is a good start. And I know it's a difficult start, even as small as it is, but it will get us on track and put us in the right direction. So I'm grateful for the candid conversations that we've had tonight and some of the difficult decisions. And I just got to note that Brian McKay is the representative from the Chamber of Commerce, and unfortunately, I wasn't made aware of that. So we didn't have him on tonight's commission or participating, and I'll make sure that I reach out to Brian to bring him up to speed. So if there's nothing else, go ahead, Jenny.
I just wanted to ask if Lisa might have any questions.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks. I think I came in somewhere around the beginning of number 4 on the minutes, so I missed much of your presentation. I am curious, in the request for decision that I pulled off of the, you talk a lot about a DCC report for $20,000. Did we move on that?
I'll just do a quick summary for you, Lisa, if you missed that. Because in order to do the DCC, we need really good population and growth and development numbers. And we don't have that accurately considering the new situation that Bamfield is facing now. So in talking with planning, really we need to do probably an OCP amendment or some other really in-depth look at development. And that's going to take probably a year. And then to do the DCC review, maybe another year. So we're looking at this being much further out than I had anticipated. So we should and will do a DCC update. I still strongly recommend that, but we're not doing it in the 2021 year. So we can add that to the financial plan for 2022 and review it at that time.
Thank you.
Great question, Lisa. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for your participation tonight. Jenny, thank you so much for facilitating this. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that there were no public questions. I checked. So far, so good. I don't think we have any public questions. Just needed to make sure I fulfilled that requirement.
Perfect, perfect. All right, well, everybody sign off. Enjoy the beautiful weather this weekend. Stay safe.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
I got on, now I can't get off.